Great minds.
Great minds, exactly. So next up, I'm super excited to introduce Joshua Vial. He should be on the call. And Joshua has a wealth of experience from launching Enspiral in 2010. So Enspiral, if you haven't heard about it already, it's a network of humans working on stuff that matters together and has transitioned it into a collective structure. And so brings a ton of passion and experience around self-organizing, which translates over to team and culture and a lot of wisdom in that area. So Josh, welcome to IC Camp, and really excited to hear your sharing over the next 15 minutes.
Ooh, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Hello all. So I got a fairly loose brief for this, which was like talk about your thoughts on the role of team and culture in innovation. It was my understanding of it. I will offer a few thoughts to start off with, but in about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to sort of tune into what you're most curious in the space. So I can make sure I'm hitting the mark and speaking to the things that you're keen on. Thanks, Amarit. And yeah, I recognize a few folks on this call. My initial thinking when thinking about the role of team and culture in orgs was, and has anyone heard the quote of culture eats strategy for breakfast? Cool. It's attributed to Peter Drucker. It does a lot of rounds in sort of management circles. I did a bit of research on it, and it seems like it wasn't mentioned much before the 2000s, and then the link to Drucker was quite later on, like a lot of quotes are. So it's a bit unclear where that thought came from. But there's a common, I guess, view that I've heard espoused, and it definitely matches my own experience around you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the right team and the right culture to implement it, it doesn't matter. And that often when you look down to the root drivers of success, the things that seem to make a difference, one of them, there's a bunch of them I think, but one of them is definitely what is the culture of the team that you've got. And when you think about what culture means, I know I go back to sort of like biological roots in a way, like you think about a culture that makes yogurt, or you think about a culture of yeast, like a biological community in a way. And my sense around culture is it's like the unspoken norms. It's when you've got the way we do things around here, which everyone agrees on, even if they don't explicitly write them out. And there's when you're building a community, over time, you might start to see it take on a shape of an identity where people start to talk in particular ways, behave in particular ways, which is just, that's how we do things around here. So you'll see culture emerging in countries, in companies, in states, in lots of different groupings. For most of it, so it's probably more relevant just to think about culture in terms of small groups of people. And it's about, okay, what's the culture of like your 6-person team or your 20-person company, etc. One rule of thumb that has really worked for me in my career has been when trying to establish culture in a group. If you've got an event, for example, and 100% of the people have been friends for 10 years, then the culture will just be there. You won't have to do anything to support it. If you've got like 2/3 of the people have been friends for 10 years and 1/3 of people are new and they're completely new to that space, you don't have to do very much to support that culture. Just by the fact of the number of people involved, the dominant culture will tend to just assert itself, or people will orientate around it. If you start to have 1/3 of the group with a very strong culture and 2/3 of the people new, then you need to support that culture if you want it to live. If you want that culture to continue, you need to make it explicit, you need to talk about it, you need to create space for people to explore it and have a relationship with it. And I think this is particularly, and if you're starting with a brand new group of people, you kind of need to as much discover your culture as create it, because people aren't blank slates. You don't just get to say, hey everyone, this is our culture, and off we go. One person says it, all the other 10 people nod their heads, and that's just the way things work. Because it's particularly when you're in small groups of people, culture is made up by who people are. And this is where I think if you're trying to create a culture and you've got an idea of the culture you would like in your organization, usually there'll be a couple of people who are founders or who are really holding it, who are responsible for the whole org. And the culture often reflects their personalities, their biases. If someone's a really hard worker, they'll tend to recruit other people who are really hard workers. Or if someone really values fun, they'll tend to recruit more fun people, or they'll have more sort of fun in the space. And all the people who show up will orientate around the implicit or explicit leaders in a team or community and start to see, oh, what's the right way to do things around here? And just like, if you read the stats about most communication is sort of nonverbal, so much of culture transmission is unconscious. It's just what people pick up by being next to each other, as opposed to following a rule book or whatnot. So that's some initial thinking on it. The biggest thing that I found around building culture in companies is it all comes down to recruitment. It doesn't matter what you're doing or how you're doing it. It kind of matters more who you're doing it with. And that if you value hard work or performance, or you value innovation, or you value speaking truth even when it's difficult, whichever those sorts of things are, then if you can't just tell people that's what the way it is. You have to find people who naturally want to do that, and to find people who naturally value the same things that is the values of your culture, for it to work. To some extent, it's the other thing I would say about culture is that whenever you do values, has anyone done values exercises in companies? We're like, what do we value in our team or company? Try and get lists of 6 principles or something. No, not so much. Some people nods. Some people just hiding behind screens. Cool. I would say that the best thing I've found with that is like, everyone can get like 50 things that are important to them, and it's usually all the good things. And you say like, yeah, performance is really good, innovation is really good, fun is really good, caring for people is really good, and you can get a really long list. And I find the way to sort it out is like, when push comes to shove, which ones do you sacrifice? When it really comes down to the wire and you have to back a couple of them, which are the ones that you keep and which are the ones that you leave behind? And different people make different choices. But if you can start to get clear on who you are as an individual or as a leader, and you as a team can start to get clear on who are you as a team, what is it that you value, that's often a way to find a pathway into the culture. All right. So that was some initial thoughts. I'm getting a bit of feedback here, but another thought that I'd like to offer, and this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people assert that culture beats strategy for lunch or eats strategy for breakfast, is that, have you ever like, I don't know, I want to get fit. I'm going to get fit. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to sign up, make a New Year's resolution, or you make a goal, and it doesn't happen the way you think it is. Or you've seen people who are trying to set goals and they sort of say they want to do something, but their actions don't line up with their words. There's an idea for me, which is around, it's our unconscious beliefs which drive a lot of our actions. It doesn't matter what you say, it kind of matters what you believe. It matters so if I think that, what would it be? If eating food makes me happy, it does. If that's a belief that drives me, I'll always tend to overeat, even if I say I don't want to eat as much. And that digging down into the unconscious beliefs is what sort of creates our personalities in a way. There's the idea of, anyone heard the phrase of your thoughts create your words create your actions create your habits create your character creates your destiny. Is that familiar to people? A little bit like a causal effect of the subtle things in life, which are often they're easier to change, but by repeating them over time, like water wearing away at a rock, they'll make the longer term or the bigger things happen or cause. And that's a lot of how I think about culture, is that if we have a culture, for example, which doesn't care for people, where it's more important to get the job done than it is to look after people in the team, that's a very clear trade-off. You'll have teams which, depending on which side of that trade-off they make, they'll have completely different cultures. Both of those cultures can work. You can have teams which perform where they say the mission is more important than the person. And there are demonstrable teams where that is their culture and they work that way. And there are other teams which say the person is more important than their performance. Hey, we can lose this battle, but let's just look after the people, and that way our team will be ready to go again. Those teams will need to have completely different strategies because of just those two ideas. And a little bit like personal development, where you're kind of always interrogating, who are you? What's important to me? What's important to me now? Is it just what was important to me 5 years ago? Who am I now, kind of thing? That getting in tune with who you are as a change maker, I see a lot of parallels in terms of a team in their evolution. The closer you are, one heuristic that worked well for me, I think this was like Paul Graham in the thousands, wrote an article around backing teams. And one of the heuristics was, how long have the co-founders known each other? If they just met last week at a startup weekend, that's very different than if they've been friends for 10 years. And the correlation they saw was that the people who've got really strong relationships, often they won't quit on the team because like, oh, it's getting really hard. I don't want to be in this business. If I was up to me, I would be out. I would give up right now. but oh, I don't want to let my mates down. So they stay in it a bit longer, and the teams who stay in it usually find a solution, or often find a solution, increases the chance of success a little bit. And so that idea of the relationship that people have as co-founders and as forming teams and as scaling teams starts to matter quite a lot. So I'll offer one sort of final thought, and I'm relying on someone else to tell me when I'm out of time here. But there's, anyone looked at extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation and the role of it in innovation? Some nods. There's some fascinating research where they basically go to university students and they say, hey, here's a piece of cardboard, here's some thumbtacks, here's a blue stick, blue tack, here's a candle. I want you to affix this candle to the wall and light it. You have 10 minutes, go. And so it's like a non-obvious solution. It's often a test of creativity. Like, okay, how many ideas can they come up with and how do they do it in a different way? And here's some string and whatnot. And then they say to one group of the students, you have 10 minutes, go. I'm paraphrasing this horribly. Look up the original research to get closer to the actual details of it. And they measure how long can they, until they can stick the candle to the wall. And then the other students, they say, hey, if you get this in the next 5 minutes, we'll give you 20 bucks. So they put a monetary incentive on the line. And they found that the people they incentivized for that task did it slower. They weren't as good at it. And this is often used in terms of remuneration and incentives and bonus sort of structures in pay, is that depending on the task, sometimes incentives work really well and sometimes they don't. So that if you're looking at incentivizing mechanical work, which you've done before, you know how to do it well, can you perform this mechanical task and can you do it a little bit faster? Incentives work great. Putting in incentives aligned with results often gets people to perform at a higher level. When you're getting people to do something for the first time, they've never done it before, i.e. the game of innovation, often incentives like that diminish performance, was sort of the outcome of that study. And when you look at, if you're in the game of innovation, you want to adopt a culture in your team which is friendly to innovation. And one of the things you'll often hear in innovation ecosystems is about being safe to fail. So it's like, hey, if you try something new and you get punished for something new and all your teammates say, hey, that idea you did, it failed, and they don't listen to any of your ideas for the next 6 months, that's a culture which is very unfriendly to innovation. Whereas if you are in a team where it's like, oh, you failed, that's great, what did you learn? Go again next time, and they back you just as much. You've got a much friendlier culture for innovation, just in a very sort of naive level. So that often when you're looking at how do you optimize a culture for innovation, you're making it safe to fail. And one of the ways to make it safe to fail is to make small bets. If it's like, hey, spend all of our runway on this idea, and if your idea doesn't work, we're out of business, that's not a very safe experiment. You're setting people up for failure in that space. So just the idea and that, great. I'm getting messages that we've got 10 minutes to go. I think I might just stop those thoughts there and say that is some initial thinking of just when I was prompted to talk about the role of team and culture innovation, that's what came up for me. Let's do a chat swarm at the moment. So what I'd like you to do is just if like what I've said before or what you came to the session with, what are you most interested in on the topic of team and culture? And type it into the chat, but don't hit enter. So just type it in, and I'm going to give you 20 seconds for this. And in 20 seconds, we're going to all hit enter as go1. So what question is most alive for you around the topic of team and culture? And resist the urge to hit enter. All right, and on the count of 3, let's hit enter. 1, 2, 3. All right, and let's just have 2 minutes just to read through some of them. Just skim through them and see what's alive for you there. Tell you what, if you could answer these questions, you'd have a book on your hand.
kok. Kebetulan.
Yeah. Maybe keep your mind on which questions are the most alive for you. And if anyone has spotted any patterns, like if you see 3 or 4 things which are all in the same vein, feel free to drop some ideas down the bottom. Some of the, I guess I saw a couple of questions which are about how do you know what your culture is? How do you measure it? I'd say the first one, pay attention to it. It's really easy when you're in business to pay attention to your profit and loss and your finances. Money is so easy to count, and it's really important to count it. If you don't count it right, then you're not going to achieve very much. But because it's so explicit and there's data around it, it draws your attention very naturally. Culture, you can actually do a lot without ever talking about culture or ever paying attention to it. I think you'll be suboptimal if you make that choice. But the first thing I would say is pay attention to culture. And I wouldn't suggest like trying to measure it and doing like surveys and, you know, how happy are you in your role, etc. If you're managing 1,000 people, maybe that's quite a natural thing to do. But when you're in small teams, I think the most important thing is to talk about how do you want to work together? Like, what did you like about the last quarter or the last month or the last week? What worked for each of you? What didn't work for each of you? I think the most important thing in creating a culture is creating safety for people to speak out. There's a lot of evidence where if people defer to those in power too much, oh, I've got an idea, but you said something different, so I'm not even going to tell you that I disagree, then you're going to lose a lot of wisdom of your team. And so making it safe for people to disagree with you if you're someone starting a team and have power. So if someone disagrees with you, it's like, oh, thanks for that idea, I really welcome it, rather than get on board with my way or the highway. If you're trying to, especially in the innovation space, I mean, if you're running a business which has been going for 50 years and it's, you know, you've seen everything, then maybe that's the right kind of culture there. But I think in a startup, you absolutely need to have humility of thought as a founder, and you need conviction that you will be able to get there. You need to have an unshaking belief that I can make this work, but you need to be very disattached to how you're going to make it work, or very detached from it. And that idea of celebrating people when they disagree with you is one thing to create an environment of safety. And I would say it's the same with sort of failure, which causes cost to the business. Maybe someone messes up and burns a strategic relationship, or they do a project and they burn a whole bunch of money, or they try something and you lose a sale, or that kind of thing, things which demonstrably hurt. It's a little bit like if you always treat that sort of stuff as too precious to fail, too important to fail, and you do it yourself and don't let other people do it, which is often what happens with founders, then the team doesn't innovate, you innovate. And so learning how to give people and assign tasks and responsibilities in a way where if they mess it up, it's okay. And a lot of that is about right sizing the risk, where if you're going to say try 100 things and one of them works, you need to make sure that 99 of those things didn't cost you very much. So often I think about when creating an environment of safety and an environment of innovation is celebrating disagreement, celebrating people to actually contest ideas and to detach from ideas. Because often when someone says, hey, I've got this brand new idea and I think we should do X, Y, and Z, they can become blind to it because they've created it. Just as founders can become blind to market realities because they've got a hypothesis about how they want the world to work. And so creating a space and a process where people can say, let's talk about that idea. Let's get data and evidence behind that idea rather than conviction and belief. And so you're saying, okay, what data do we have? How can we get more data? So this is sort of like Lean Startup 101 kind of culture. I find is often a way to create safety where people can detach from the ideas and say, oh, I had an idea, but the data didn't hold it out. And they feel a little bit more like a scientist with an invalid hypothesis than someone who got rejected by their team. So separating ideas from people, celebrating disagreement, and right-sizing tasks and risk is often what I think about in terms of creating psychological safety in teams, but also creating safe-to-fail environments where people can innovate is some of the things there. Yeah, I saw a few things about bringing people onto your team. And as you know, most people will be starting teams of 2 or 3 or 4, and as you get customers and traction and whatnot, you might be getting up to teams of 10 and 20, etc. And a lot of the growing pains you can solve when you grow. You don't need to worry about them right now. You need to worry about validating your idea and making sure there's, you know, you get to have that problem of growing to 20 people or whatnot. What I would say about bringing people on in early stages is If you're bringing them on as a contractor and it's just it's a fixed contract, you're buying their skills, values alignment doesn't matter as much. You don't need to say, hey, are we really on the same page about how we want to work together or what we're going to work on? You can be a little bit more transactional about it. And so if you're hiring like your initial lawyers or accountants or whatnot, that's an example of a very clear freelancer sort of engagement. But maybe you're bringing on a graphic designer to build a website or someone, a technologist to build some tech for you. Just being very clear, this is a freelancing relationship. It means you'll have a wider pool of candidates. You won't do as much effort on screening for value, you'll just screen for ability. If you're bringing on someone as an employee who you want to go with you for the role, or as a potential co-founder or an early stage person who might get some equity at some stage, I wouldn't only look at values, but values I would definitely look at first. Skills matter. You need to manage the skills in your team, but it's like choosing co-founders is pretty much, for entrepreneurs, it's virtually as important as choosing a spouse. You're going to spend so much time with that person. If you don't get on, that's going to sink your business. Most startups fail because of breakdown of relationships with founding teams. I think that's the biggest cause, and the second one is building stuff people don't want. I thought they'd want it. I built it. They're not buying it from me. They won't buy it at the price I want to sell it. That's the second reason why things go out of business. So the relationship of particularly the co-founders, but I would also say the early stage team, because every time you bring someone new on, what they do is they look around at the people who've been there for a while. How do we do things around here? And sometimes they'll explicitly ask, how do we do things around here? And then other times they will be looking at, okay, they'll just pay attention to it. And they'll just see, oh, that person knocks off an hour early every day and no one says anything. That's a culture of slackness. And a lot of companies have a culture of slackness, or of appearing to be busy, or of making yourself so valuable that they can't get rid of you kind of thing. There's a lot of toxic behaviors in the workspaces, which people often pick up just by being in that environment. And so what I would say is that the value and the alignment of your early stage full-time employees is going to be the biggest determinant of how new people orientate themselves in the system. And that when you start to have cultures that don't work, it's like, people leave because of the team, because of the relationship, because they're not getting their needs met. And the cost of churn of your early scale people can be quite high when you've got trying to bring on that 10th, 15th person, etc. So the people who've been there longer shape the cultures quite a lot, and you want to make that line up as well as you can. So I'm seeing that's nearly at time for me now.
Yeah, spot on, Josh. Thank you so much. There's a ton of